And so it's, as we continue this journey through the Jewish year, we've mostly been able to focus on the holidays that have come up. And now we're kind of on a little bit of a break where we are in the midst of this period between Passover and Shavuot, known as the Omer, counting the Omer. So I'll just spend a moment or two about the counting the Omer. And then I thought, because Shavuot isn't for another 4 weeks, that we have some time until we talk about the holiday of Shavuot, that I would spend some time today talking about Shabbat, because there are other things that happen over the course of the Jewish year and Jewish concepts that we can talk about as well, that are part of what it means to be a Jew as we go through the year. So counting the Omer is like many of the holidays, has mainly an agricultural significance, right? So we talked about the holiday of Passover being the springtime holiday, celebrating the birth of the rebirth of trees and flowers, things like that happen in the springtime. It's a natural agricultural time to consider that as the beginning of the year. And in fact, the Jewish calendar used to be based on the springtime, and the month of Passover, the month of Nisan, as it's called on the Hebrew calendar, was the first month of the year. It was only in the time of the rabbis that changed to Rosh Hashanah, being the 7th month of the year, becoming the first month of the year. So when we're told in the Torah from the book of Leviticus, where we have the list of holidays, sacred occasions that are celebrated throughout the year, we're told there that you're supposed to bring an omer, which is a measure. It's one word, like ephah is another word in Hebrew that's used in the Torah to measure something. Log is another word that's used to measure something. That's a liquid measure. So dry measures that the Torah knows about, that we know about, are ephah and omer, just as a couple of examples. So how much that is, you can Google what is the equivalent of an omer, and you will find a Wikipedia article or something else that will tell you exactly how much an omer is. So it's a sheaf. It's usually translated as a sheaf of grain. New grain had to be brought. A sheaf of new grain, an omer of new grain, was brought on the day after the first day of Passover. So the second day of Passover, this omer was brought to be waved. Like you imagine a sheaf of grain that you'd wave, the Kohen would wave as an offering to God. And then from that day on, you count 50 days until the holiday of Shavuot. Agriculturally, that meant that the holiday of Shavuot, 7 weeks after Passover, is the holiday in which we celebrate the first fruits. We'll talk more about that as we get closer to Shavuot, because Shavuot means weeks, W-E-E-K-S, so the 7 weeks. And it's also called Chag HaBikurim, the holiday of the first fruits, because people would bring the first fruits of the harvest to the Mishkan and later to the temple in Jerusalem. So agriculturally, we're counting the days until we bring the first fruits. But historically, so all holidays have a historical connection as well. Historically, we're counting the days until we're at Mount Sinai and receiving the Torah at Mount Sinai. So in the book of Exodus, chapter 15 is the Song of the Sea. So the Israelites cross the sea after leaving Egypt. And then we're told that in the 3rd month after crossing the sea, chapter 20, chapter 19, they get to Mount Sinai. So that third month is in the Hebrew calendar today. You have Nisan is the first month, ER is the second month, which we're in right now, and then it's Sivan, which is the third month. So the sixth day of the third month is when God spoke the Ten Commandments, and the people, the entire people of Israel, heard that and experienced what is known as God's revelation at Mount Sinai. So it just so happens that that's 50 days after Passover. Now, the rabbis ensured that it would be 50 days by saying that the counting has to begin on the second day of Passover, and it concludes when Shavuot begins 7 weeks later exactly. So some months are 29 days, some months 30 days. So Nisan has to be 30 days. So that's why it was a 2-day Rosh Chodesh last week, the 30th day of Nisan, then the first day of ER, in order for there to be exactly Shavuot be the 50th day after the beginning of the counting of the Omer. So that's the Omer. It has taken on mystical significance. The mystical segment of the Jewish community, those mystics, those who study Kabbalah, find mystical significance as we count the Omer. And in fact, our Lev Shalem focuses on that. The Sim Shalom prayer books didn't focus on it, but the Lev Shalem does by saying, and I'm looking in the Lev Shalem Sidur, beginning on page 63. You'll see on the next page that there are these Kabbalistic mystical concepts that I am not up on at all, and I have never gotten into. That just some people just are wired in a particular way to appreciate the mystical ideas that Kabbalah provides, but my brain is not wired in that way. But there are 10 sephirot, 10 levels that separate earth from God's heavenly realm. And our purpose of existence, according to the mystics, is to climb those 10 layers to try to get to God. And these layers it's not a direct climb up a ladder, that these 10 layers are interconnected. And one can climb going up, going sideways, diagonally, however, through these layers of sphirot. They all have different names, which are all different aspects of God. And so as we count the Omer, the page 64 and following has each week of the Omer has a different name of these sphirot that we are going through as we count the 50 days. So the first week would have been Chesed. The second week, which we concluded, is Din and Gvura. The third week, which we're in right now, is Tiferet. The fourth week, Netzach. Fifth week, Hod. And the sixth week is Yesod. So, and the seventh week is Malchut. So if you wanted to learn more about the mystical ideas behind the counting of the Omer, please look at the Lev Shalem then, those pages for that connection and explanation. So that's the Omer that we're in the midst of, and I wanted to spend the rest of the time today talking about Shabbat. There's a lot to be said about Shabbat. And Shabbat, in many ways, is one of the foundational elements of what it means to be Jewish. If one could come up with a couple of things to say, what are the defining elements of Judaism? not in terms of ideology, but in terms of practice. One would say Shabbat, one would say kashrut. These are two main defining elements of Judaism that have extensive legal ramifications and intricacies involved that really, as you go through it and study it through the rabbinic literature from the time of the rabbis to today, you see there's an extensive body of literature about it, and an extensive amount of time that the Jewish community spends with. So just to buy kosher food is a whole industry in and of itself that has become politicized, but there's a tremendous industry out there, not just the OU, but there's the OK, there's the Kuf K, there's the Star K, there's the CRC, that's the Chicago one. Those are the four big kashrut supervising agencies that are national in scope. So in other words, if you walk into Harris Teeter here in Olney and buy milk, you'll see that the milk is certified by the Chicago Rabbinic Council, right? So the CRC is a national hashgacha, a supervisory agency, even though it's based in Chicago. But the others, the Star K is based in Baltimore, but they're also national, right? If you buy Bigelow tea, I think it is. Yes, Bigelow teas are certified by, and that I think they're based in Colorado, but they're certified by the Star K. OU is the most common of them all, and it's an incredible industry. There's separate divisions just set aside with a huge staff of people trained to go out to factories and industry to supervise kashrut. Shabbat, it doesn't have an industry like that, but Shabbat is in its own way a defining element of what it means to be Jewish. All religions, well, no, I shouldn't say all religions. The three major religions, as we call them, Muslim, Islam, Christianity, and Judaism, have a Sabbath day. And their Sabbath days are different from each other, right? The Muslim Sabbath is Friday, our Shabbat is Saturday, and Christian Shabbat is Sunday. All from stemming from Genesis, in which on the first day God brought order to the universe and order to the world and created the lights, and then subsequently through the sixth day, creating all that we know of in the world around us and in the universe above us. And on the seventh day, God rested. Now, it doesn't say Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. It says first day, second day, third day, fourth day, fifth day, sixth day, seventh day. So it just so happens that for Judaism, the first day is Sunday, but for Christianity, the first day is Monday. And for Islam, the first day would be Saturday then. All Christianity and Islam to be different than Judaism, to point out that they know. Now, this is just not, and I wouldn't exclude Judaism from this attitude either. It's the sense that we have the answer. We know what is the true counting of days, and we know what the seventh day is, and they don't. The other religions don't. So it's unfortunate that we all don't observe Shabbat on the same day. It would make for better relations among all the religions, and would make for a beautiful Shabbat if those three religions were all observing Shabbat, Sabbath, on the same day. But unfortunately, when the religions were developing, there wasn't a sense of interfaith camaraderie and interfaith dialogue. It was all a rather militant and saying our religion is better than yours. So, which then leads to the Seventh-day Adventists, the Christian denomination that sees Saturday as the seventh day and not Sunday as the seventh day, setting them apart from Jews and setting them apart from fellow Christians. So Sabbath, and getting back to this, and feel free, as we always do, feel free to interrupt with, unmute yourselves with a question or a comment. But Sabbath, to begin with, from the very beginning, is seen as a day of rest, a day to reconnect to the process of creation. So at the very first, when we're first introduced to the concept of Shabbat in the Torah, it is in relationship to creation. God stopped creating on the seventh day and rested. Shavat vayinafash. That phrase, God rested, and so vayinafash, it's really a word that is not really appropriate to use for God. Excuse me, it's from the word nefesh, which in the Bible means body. In modern Hebrew, it means soul. So vayinafash would be rejuvenated, kind of spiritually, the soul was restored. Shavat vayinafash. So how can we say that about God, that God's soul was restored? Why would God have a soul? So the translation, let me just look at it quickly, from chapter 2 in Genesis, says, so verse 2, on the seventh day, God finished the work that he had been doing, and he ceased on the seventh day from all the work that he had done. And God blessed the seventh day and declared it holy, because on it God ceased from all the work of creation that he had done. So the phrase vayinafash is not from that place in the Torah, probably from, it's what happens when I teach without having the source right in front of me. So the phrase is from Exodus. Anyway, I'm not going to find it now. So then that makes more sense than talking about people. This is what I mean by this is that in Genesis, we're talking about God resting on the seventh day. Every other time we're talking about Shabbat in the Torah, it's about what people have to do. Here in Genesis is what God does. So part of an initial understanding of what Shabbat is about is for humanity to connect to what God did on the seventh day, and to try to connect to that spiritual, theological side of what Shabbat is. Because for the Mishnah and the Talmud, for rabbinic literature, for the rabbinic law code, it's all about what people have to do in order to observe Shabbat. But for the Torah, it's about what God did and also what people have to do. Okay, so there are these two sides to what it means to observe Shabbat. And often, especially traditional Jews, get caught up with understanding the restrictions of Shabbat and everything that we can or cannot do. And yet what gets lost is what all that is meant to inspire within us, and that is a connection to God, a connection to what the world could be like if we could bring it back to the time of God's creation of the world. Okay, so the classic book that focuses on this aspect of Shabbat, the Shabbat of creation, the Shabbat of spirituality, is this book by Abraham Joshua Heschel called The Sabbath. It's you can see it's a thin paperback book, which is very deep and profound philosophy from one of the foremost Jewish thinkers of the 20th century, Abraham Joshua Heschel, a man who, tomorrow night we have this event in which we're having a panel discussion about this documentary movie called Shared Legacies, about the history of the Jewish Black coalition during the civil rights era. And a lot of time in that movie was spent on focusing on Abraham Joshua Heschel and how he was a good friend of Dr. Martin Luther King, and how they walked arm in arm in that walk across the bridge in Selma, Alabama. So a man who could have his head in the clouds and write a book like this, a very, very profound spiritual book about what the meaning of Shabbat is, could also have his feet on the ground, literally, and walk with Dr. Martin Luther King. So here, I highly recommend this book. If you want just a quick, it's a brief but deep and profound introduction to this theological, spiritual understanding of Shabbat, this would be the book to read. And the phrase that you may have heard, that Shabbat is a palace in time, comes from this book from Heschel. The other element of Shabbat is everything else that we learn about Shabbat in the Torah, of which there are several references, but it's a commandment that that human beings need to refrain from melacha. Melacha is the Hebrew word, which is often translated as work. And it's defined by the rabbis in a very specific way. So it's one of the 10 commandments, right? So the only ritual of any ritual is Shabbat that is mentioned in the 10 commandments, right? They're all moral and religious in nature, right? To believe in one God only, don't have other gods, no graven images, don't swear falsely, observe the Sabbath day, honor your parents, do not murder, etc., etc. So nothing about observing Passover. Passover isn't one of the 10 commandments. Hanukkah isn't one of the 10 commandments, but Shabbat is. So Shabbat then just highlights then that this ritual, this day, every seventh day, uniquely defines who we are as a Jewish people. But it's not just a Jewish concept. The idea, it's a concept that's for all people, right? The 10 commandments, there's nothing specifically Jewish about the 10 commandments. The belief in one God is not just meant for the Jewish people to believe in, it's meant for all people in the world to understand that if you want to grow religiously, then that means to believe in one God, not a multitude of gods with a small g. That idolatry is not is not something that leads to a moral and ethical life. Monotheism does. Shabbat, by same token, does not necessarily mean a Jewish way of life. It means that you are elevating your life in a way that you are setting aside one day a week to God. 6 days a week, you're focusing on you and providing for your family and whatever you do those 6 days. You take care of your needs on those 6 days. On the 7th day, you stop doing that and get back to a sense, or try to restore a sense within you of what, where the world came from, where humanity came from, what the role of God in the universe and in the world is. That's what Shabbat is supposed to do. So there's a uniquely Jewish way to do that in how we observe Shabbat, but it doesn't mean that the Muslims don't have just as valid a way of how they observe their Sabbath day, and also the Christians and how they observe their Sabbath day. So the idea, those who take Sabbath seriously in any of those religions, is a day in which it is starkly different from the other 6 days. It's a day that people are devoted to think about what the bigger purpose in life is, what bigger meaning in life is, how we are supposed to recognize God's presence in our life as well. So that's what Shabbat is supposed to do for us. Now, of course, it all gets complicated by the rabbis, right? So all of what I've said is all well and good. How to go about doing that? Well, it could be left to people's own devices and how to do that. So there are certain prayers that we recite on Shabbat that we don't recite other days of the week. Prayers that are added to the service, so that Shabbat morning service is a lot longer than a weekday morning service. A regular weekday morning service, we know, takes about 30 minutes if we're davening with a minyan. On Shabbat, it takes at least 2 hours to get through the morning service with all that is done. So why do we read from the Torah on Shabbat morning, such a lengthy section? Again, to get back to the connection to God. If Shabbat, like the very beginning in Genesis, is supposed to remind us of God's role in the universe, then reading from Torah, traditionally God's book, brings us back to that and reconnects with us. So that takes on a major part of the Shabbat morning service. And we also say more prayers and more psalms than we usually do that focuses our attention on God's creation of the world around us and the gift of the Shabbat itself. So praying on Shabbat, thinking about these things on Shabbat should, for some, could be enough to make Shabbat different, and perhaps even to refrain from doing certain things that might take away from the spirituality of the day, or focus our attention on doing something special on Shabbat that makes it into a special day. But the rabbis went deeper than just saying people should make the day different. People should refrain from work and rest on Shabbat. They defined for us what work is, and spent a lot of time defining those works or those types of work that would be prohibited on Shabbat. So the classic understanding of how the rabbis work is their interpretation of one of the commandments of Shabbat is given while in the midst of the commandments of how to build the Mishkan, the portable sanctuary in the desert. So as the Mishkan is being described and how to be built, and all those details are given, as the vestments of the Kohanim are described as well, then God commands the people to observe Shabbat. So the rabbis say, what does Shabbat have to do in the midst of this long list of how to build the Mishkan? So the rabbis answer that everything involved in building the Mishkan would be everything that would be prohibited from doing on Shabbat. And the rabbis then derived 39 categories of work that would be prohibited. And from those 39 categories, everything, they derive other categories of work from them. So even new categories today are derived from those categories, like the use of electricity, for example. So for the rabbis, kindling a flame, because that is listed separately elsewhere in the Torah as not to be done on Shabbat. So I should step back for a second. Yes, I will get there, Margie. Shabbat, we're told about Shabbat in the Ten Commandments. So the Ten Commandments are given in the Torah twice. We're told about Shabbat in Genesis, so that's 3 times in the Torah. There are 2 more times about Shabbat when we're told about the building of the Mishkan. So the design of the Mishkan, Shabbat's in there. And then when the Israelites carried out those details and were building the Mishkan, Shabbat's there too. So you have that. There's another time that Shabbat is mentioned when somebody in the book of Numbers is gathering sticks on Shabbat. And Moses finds out from God that that man who was gathering sticks had to be executed for that. And we're also told elsewhere not to light a fire on Shabbat. So can't light a fire, can't gather sticks. And then elsewhere we're told to refrain from work on Shabbat. So the gathering sticks and and we're also told that the manna, when it fell from heaven every day while they were for 40 years in the desert, it did not fall on Shabbat. A double portion would fall on Friday so that the people wouldn't gather in on Shabbat, which presumably is another category of work. So you can't gather in on Shabbat, you can't gather sticks on Shabbat, and you can't light a fire on Shabbat. So specifically those 3 things we're told we can't do on Shabbat. Everything else we can't do is based on the rabbi. So Margie asks a question which can serve as one of many examples that I could give about how the rabbis derive and further derive and further derive new meaning and new laws for Shabbat. So we are told one of the categories of work that we're not allowed to do on Shabbat is to carry. So the rabbis presumed that part of the work of the Mishkan would be to carry some things from one place to another. So just that work of carrying. So how you carry doesn't matter. If it's called carrying, you can't do it. So for today, in today's world, how do we carry something? It's not just me holding my talus in my hand like this. This could be carrying, but I have keys in my pocket. So I take out my keys, my car key in my pocket. By putting it in my pocket, you'd think I'm wearing the key. One could understand that. It's in my pocket, which is in my pants. I'm wearing my pants. I'm wearing my keys. No, anything in your pocket, you're carrying. So that's putting something in your pocket is considered carrying. Whereas wearing my glasses is called wearing. It's not carrying. Is there a difference, really, between having keys in my pocket and having glasses on my face? I don't think there's a difference. It looks like I'm carrying my glasses. It looks like I'm carrying my keys. Or it looks like I'm wearing glasses. It looks like I'm wearing my keys. So for the rabbis, though, they say if you have something in your pocket, you're carrying it. If you're wearing it, then you're wearing it. And they didn't have, I don't know if they had glasses 1800 years ago. I don't think so, but that was considered wearing and not carrying. Carrying can also mean pulling behind you. Like if you're pulling something with a rope, that could be carrying. Or pushing a baby in a baby carriage and a stroller, that is considered carrying also. But you can hold your baby in your arms or your grandchild in your arms. That's not carrying, that's holding. Pushing the baby in the carriage is called carrying. So for the rabbis, yes. So you see how difficult and how random these definitions are, right? Because I would think holding a baby in your arms would be considered carrying, that you shouldn't be allowed to do on Shabbat. Or if you're wearing a backpack or a baby carrier, that would be carrying. But pushing the baby in the stroller, how is that carrying? You're pushing. Okay, but for the rabbis, that's considered carrying. So if we're going along with this idea, right? And Jules is smiling. Jules Fink there is a lawyer. So anybody who's a lawyer just has to smile about this, because lawyers or legislators come up with categories like this, and those become the categories from which things are then defined. Okay, they try to come up with a category that makes sense and is consistent, but it's not always consistent. And you just have to say, just like I pointed out, glasses on my face is wearing, it's not carrying. Keys in my pocket, it's not wearing, it's carrying, right? Depending on how much stuff I have in my pocket, I might not even know that I have something in my pocket, but it's still considered carrying if it's in your pocket. Glasses, I've been wearing glasses for 50 years. I most of the time don't know that I'm wearing glasses anymore, but it's considered wearing. It's not considered carrying. Okay, so the rabbi said that for carrying especially, now carrying, of all the works that you can think of, carrying has implications for community, because for the rabbis, one of the highlights of Shabbat is celebrating Shabbat with friends and family. And the highlight, which we've missed in this COVID time, is to invite people over to your home to have Shabbat dinner with, especially if not the other meals of Shabbat as well. So when you're invited to someone's home for Shabbat, usually you bring something to the house just as a token of saying thanks, right? Whether it's some flowers or a dessert or something else for the meal or anything like that, you'd be bringing something to somebody's house to say thank you for having me. But how do you bring that? Now you could, because that's bringing it as carrying. So you could bring it ahead of time. Some people do that. But if you're going to bring it on Shabbat, you can't, because it's carrying. So the rabbis then, in their great wisdom, since they were lawyers themselves, said, well, when you're in your house, you're allowed to carry because it's private property. You can carry your baby. You can have keys in your pocket. You can do all of this carrying. All this carrying can be done in private property. You just can't carry something from private property to public property or vice versa. Now, there are 4 categories of property. I'm not going to get into what the other 2 are. It's much too complicated. If you think that this is complicated, it's even more complicated when the rabbis defining the different kinds of property. So the rabbis say, they ask, is there a way to make public property into private property? And they answer yes. And the answer is Margie's question. That's what's called an eruv. Okay, the eruv that we understand today that gets to carrying is building a fence around a community. It could be as small as two houses together. They could have a fence around those two houses and designate that fenced in area as private property. Or it could be around the whole area. So here in Olney, there happens to be an eruv around Olney, where most eruvim, the plural of eruv, most eruvim today utilize utility wires. And there often you will see, if you just Google city council eruv, you will see different places in America in which the city council had discussion as to whether utility poles could be used by the Jewish community to be designated as an eruv. So if you look carefully along Georgia Avenue, along the south side of Georgia Avenue, you will notice on the sidewalk, those utility poles that are there, all of them have a small piece, narrow piece of wood nailed to them. That narrow piece of wood, yeah, Margie, you're looking like, huh? Take a look, take a walk in front of the, just on Georgia Avenue from Old Baltimore Road going downhill, like to the church and to the Only Care, that memory care place. All those telephone poles have a thin wooden post attached to them. That thin wooden post says that the Orthodox community of Olney is utilizing that telephone pole or that utility pole as part of the eruv. So if you go on eruv Olney, you'll see a map of the eruv around all of Olney, and you will see that the eruv extends from Old Baltimore Road south to Georgia Avenue to Emory Lane. So that Sharei Tefillah happens to be within the eruv of Olney. And the way I walk up Georgia, make a right on Old Baltimore to get into my neighborhood, that's where the eruv goes as well. It extends north on Georgia Avenue, but it widens at Old Baltimore to include the whole Hallowell neighborhood. And then beyond that, I don't know, but look at the map. There happens to be an eruv around Kemp Mill. There happens to be an eruv around White Oak. There happens to be an eruv around Woodside also, those neighborhoods in Silver Spring. So most metropolitan areas that have a large Jewish population happen to have an eruv. Every now and then, jurisdictions will argue about the eruv, because it gets to, well, first of all, there's no damage being done to these utility poles by just having a piece of wood nailed to it, okay? So you just need permission from the utility company to do that. But usually if the city council gets involved, it's more about the anti-Semitism and also all about property taxes in schools. Because usually when there's an eruv, there's a large Jewish population. And if there's a large Jewish population, the Jewish population that cares about an eruv is the Jewish population that sends children to day school and not to public school. So that the children who live in that area, the houses are being bought by families who are not supporting the public school. So then it affects the public school if there's an eruv, and it might affect property taxes. Yes, yeah, you just look at the map. It doesn't matter how far it goes. I was just pointing out, Elizabeth, what it looks like, how you know that a pole is an eruv by that extra piece of wood that's attached to it. So everybody can go online, just Google eruv Olney, and you'll see there might be a separate website just for the eruv, but it could be part of the Orthodox synagogue in Olney, their website. Not the Chabad, but the separate Ohev Shalom Orthodox synagogue. So anyway, so eruv then gets into, when city council gets involved, it's all about property taxes in schools and things like that. So, right, because if schools if school population is affected because the Orthodox Jews who want the Eruv aren't sending their kids to the public school, and if public school then gets affected, then property taxes either go up or down based on how good the public schools are, right? So, okay, so the idea of a Shabbat goy. Okay, so I think that with that, Marlene, thank you. That will be the end of our discussion for today about Shabbat. So this is, all of this discussion about Eruv gets to the rabbinic understanding of carrying and enabling carrying to be done on Shabbat, right? So that initially, so that people can carry food or gifts from one house to another to enhance Shabbat observance. And later, for people to push their children in a baby carriage to shul on Shabbat to make it easier for families to attend shul as well. Now, you're allowed to hold your child in your arms on Shabbat. That's not carrying, but you can't push your child in a baby carriage on Shabbat unless there's an Eruv. Okay, so that's the traditional understanding. So it doesn't make sense logically, right? It's makes sense to me logically if carrying means work, like you're going to be huffing and puffing from doing it. I would think I would huff and puff more from carrying a child in my arms than I would pushing them in a stroller. Okay, all things being equal, and the street is level, and the wheels on the carriage are oiled. So if you're pushing it not on grass, you're pushing it on a sidewalk or on a street, there's hardly any work involved in pushing a baby in a carriage. I've done it. Haven't done it in a while, but I've done it. There's less work. I can go further pushing a child without huffing and puffing than I could if I were holding a child in my arms. However, for the rabbis, it's work to push the baby in the carriage. It is not work to hold the baby in the arms. Okay, so logic often is not part of the definition of work. Okay, it's so a halachic, a Jewish legal definition is not often the same as other definitions. So Marlene raises a question about the Shabbos goy. So the concept of a Shabbos goy, which isn't really a nice way, it's really inappropriate to use that kind of language anymore. I mean, we use it, but we really shouldn't use it anymore. So the idea of whether somebody, so the idea of a Shabbos goy is that somebody is doing work for you on Shabbat that you're not allowed to do on Shabbat. Okay, so the question for the rabbis is, can you have someone do work for you that you're not allowed to do? So the rabbis answer not definitively. They say yes, but with caution. So in other words, we're not allowed to cook on Shabbat. Okay, so there's one example. Not allowed to cook on Shabbat because cooking involves fire, and you're not allowed to use fire on Shabbat for purposes like this. So you're allowed to warm food in an oven that is turned on before Shabbat and kept at a temperature that won't cook the food that would be put into it. So you can put your oven at the lowest temperature. My oven, the lowest temperature is 170 degrees. So you put the oven at 170 degrees. Food is already cooked before Shabbat. You can't cook food on Shabbat. You can keep food warm in the oven on Shabbat. That's totally fine, but you can't be cooking on Shabbat. You can't turn on the oven on Shabbat. You can't turn off the oven on Shabbat. You can turn it on before Shabbat, keep it on all of Shabbat, turn it off after Shabbat. But let's say that you don't want to waste the energy on Shabbat. can you have somebody else turn on and off your oven for you? So the answer is yes, if you ask them ahead of time to do it. So Elvis Presley famously was a Shabbos goy growing up in Memphis. Colin Powell, General Colin Powell, I believe, was a Shabbos goy. Governor Mario Cuomo, I believe, was a Shabbos goy. So they talk about it fondly, or they talked about it fondly, about their relationship with the Jewish community and their Jewish neighbors. So Mario Cuomo, I guess in New York, New York City, was asked by his neighbor, or maybe a few neighbors in the building, to, before Shabbat, turn on the oven, or no, he was asked before Shabbat, will you come into my house tomorrow at 1 o'clock, at 9 o'clock to turn on the oven, and then at 1 o'clock to turn off the oven. So they had to rely on Mario showing up on time both times, because you can't go knocking on Mario's door on Shabbat. Hey, Mario. Well, you could say, hey, Mario, where are you? Do you remember what we talked about yesterday? You can't say, hey, Mario, I need you to turn on my oven, because then you're violating Shabbat by doing it on Shabbat. Same thing, like we had Clarence back on Lockwood Drive as a custodian from the synagogue. So Clarence is always there to open up the shul on Shabbat. If the heat wasn't on and it was freezing cold, I couldn't say to Clarence, can you turn on the heat? I could say to Clarence, boy, it's cold in here. And just as a conversation, are you cold? I feel cold, don't you? And he'd have to get it into his head, oh, maybe I should turn on the heat, but I can't say to him, turn on the heat or turn on the air conditioning. So you can't ask somebody directly on Shabbat to do work for you. But you
So could I ask a follow-up?
Yeah, go ahead, Marlene.
So I was going to ask a follow-up question, because when we say the Kiddush, on Saturday morning, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but it says you don't do work, and not your maid servant or servant, and your animals or the stranger who's among you. So what do we consider the Shabbos goy? Somebody we know, and somebody who already lives there. And what is the stranger? Somebody we don't know, or
yes, right? So it's splitting hairs, Marlene, because the fifth commandment, the fourth commandment says to observe Shabbat and to the people who are in your household. So those are the male and female servants that you have. They're part of your household, as opposed to someone you hire to do work for you. So now, you hire me to be your rabbi, and I'm working on Shabbat for you, right? My father worked for several congregations. He was employed. Rabbis are employed. We work on Shabbat. How do we get around that? Because we have a contract that we signed ahead of time. That ahead of time we agreed that this is what we're going to be doing, right? So the same thing with the Shabbos goy or the custodian. You have in their contract, they know they have to work on Shabbat. They're choosing to do that by signing the contract. So therefore, that's how we get around this and allow them to do work for us on Shabbat. But again, we can't ask directly on Shabbat itself to do work on Shabbat. Rita, you have your hand raised. So unmute yourself.
Sorry. Okay. The first question is pertaining to kashrut. The OU that's accepted by the Orthodox community. The K they do not accept.
A plain K. I didn't mention the plain K. Right.
Okay. Yes. But if it's a circle K, then it's okay.
Circle K is different from the plain. Circle K is a different organization. That's called the OK. That's a different company. The OU is one company. The OK is another one. The star with a K inside of it is a different one. The letter Kuf, the letter K inside the letter Kuf is a different one. So they're all different companies. The plain K You can't trademark a letter of the alphabet. So anybody can put a letter K on their label, and there's no legal ramification for that. So you have to, one has to, as a kosher consumer, you have to be a little bit more careful about seeing just the letter K to know whether that's acceptable enough or not. So General Mills cereals like Cheerios, I think Cheerios just have a letter K on it. It's known that the rabbi who does General Mills is an acceptable rabbi, so that's an acceptable K, as opposed to the K, I'm trying to think of something else, like the K on Jell-O, used to be. The Jell-O pudding used to, a long time ago, now I think it has an OK on it, but years ago, I think like when I was in college, Jell-O used to have just a letter K on it. And so that was a question as to whether that was acceptable or not. Okay, what's your other question?
That writing, I know writing is forbidden on Shabbos.
Yeah, not allowed to write on Shabbat, right?
Because you're doing work.
Oh, because that is, writing is considered, so one way to try to understand what work is, it's something that you are creating that hadn't been there before. Okay, so that, and making permanent. So when you write on Shabbat, the writing is permanent, right? So if you're, because you're not allowed to erase on Shabbat either. So even if you write on with pencil, and that you can argue that pencil is not permanent because you can erase it, well, it's still considered permanent, and you're not allowed to write on Shabbat. That's correct. So there are some people who take that to the extreme, who say, because you're not only not allowed to write, you're not allowed to erase. All right, thanks for the correction, Fran, about OU with General Mills. Maybe it's Post cereal that has the K. It's one of those cereals has the K, and the K is acceptable for those cereals. That's just my point, that some Ks are acceptable, some are not. With writing and how extreme it gets with writing. What about happy birthday, Jonah, on a birthday cake? There's writing on a birthday cake. And let's say my birthday falls on Shabbat and I cut my cake, then the writing is not permanent anymore. There are some people, not all. I mean, so in other words, the writing on a cake is meant to be impermanent because it's made with icing, and the intention of the writing on a cake is to be eaten. However, there's some people who'd say writing is writing, and doesn't matter that it's going to be eaten. You shouldn't be cutting a cake that has writing on it on Shabbat. So I think only the very frum would not have writing on cake on Shabbat. There are hospitals in Israel, like Shaare Tzedek Hospital in Jerusalem, does this, where they are creative. Like, in other words, you're allowed to save a life on Shabbat, and you're allowed to see a doctor on Shabbat if life is at stake. And doctors and nurses can work in a hospital on Shabbat in order to save a life. But there's paperwork involved in working on Shabbat, right? Anybody who's been in a hospital knows, or just in a doctor's office, the doctor or the nurse is taking records down and writing things down in your chart. You just have to do that. There's a way, Shaare Tzedek has come up with a way to be able to do that, write with impermanently, and then it gets copied over after Shabbat, made permanent for part of the records on Shabbat. So all of this, we'll continue. It's 2:00 and our time is at a close. All of this discussion. So we just spent the past 15, 20 minutes talking about carrying and Shabbos goy on Shabbat. All of this gets away from the very beginning that I talked about with Abraham Joshua Heschel's book and the book of Genesis about the spirituality of Shabbat. And a big argument that people have, and we can talk about this next time, is how to find the spirituality amidst all of the minutia and restrictions of Jewish law. So have a good rest of the day, everybody. Stay safe and
Thank
healthy,
you.
and see you next time.
Thank you.
Hey,
Thank you.
Yasher
Thank
Koach.
you.
Thank you. Yasher
Thank you. Have a
Koach.
good day.